Have you ever had a family member who has been in the hospital for some period of time only to leave and need longer term care? We're joined once again by patient advocate Cindy Gatton. She's back to tell us why you need to understand about long term care. Welcome, Cindy.
Thanks for being here.
Okay, tell us a story.
Well, I'd like to tell you a story about a client that I worked with recently. Holly is employed. She's working, and she provides the health insurance for her family. Her husband, Tom, is covered under that insurance, but because he's older than 65, he also had Medicare. Tom had a serious stroke several months previous to when we first started working and was driving a truck when the stroke happened. His truck went into a tree, and he also fractured his back. It was a very serious situation. He was in the hospital for a couple of weeks, and with the broken back, the recommendation had been that he was going to need some pretty extensive rehabilitation. He wasn't going to be able to get that at home. And I think, as most of us know, hospitals take care of us when we're acutely ill, but when you still need care, but not full hospital care, the next step is probably going to be looking at skilled nursing, or what back in the day we might have called a nursing home.
Right.
So Holly was really concerned because some of the nursing homes in her area didn't have really good reputations. She didn't really know how we would get him into a nursing home. So we worked with the hospital discharge planners. We did some research. There's a lot of information out there on Medicare.gov that tracks information about nursing homes. And we found a place, and were able to get him in, that she really liked, and he was getting good rehabilitation there. But at the end of the time that he was allowed, that was covered by their insurance and covered by Medicare, he really wasn't ready to come home.
And what period of time does Medicare or insurance cover rehabilitative services?
As with most things, it depends on the policy. The policy that she had through work covered him for 30 days. Medicare typically will cover 60 days after a hospitalization.
Wow, so it's really a short period of time for somebody that needs chronic, longer-term care.
You know, it really is, and I think many of us, myself included, until I started studying to become an advocate, we all kind of think that Medicare is going to cover long-term care, and the fact is it doesn't.
Wow. And so what are people to do?
Well, this was a really good case study to look at this. What ultimately happened is that Holly discovered, because like many of us, she hadn't really been paying real close attention to the bills because insurance was covering it, that when we got closer to the time that the coverage for care was going to expire, that her bill was over $7,000 a month.
Wow.
A lot of money.
And this is in a nursing home.
This was in a nursing home where he was getting full physical therapy, occupational therapy almost daily. It was a great nursing home.
Sounds pretty intensive, the way you would want it for
Exactly.
your loved one.
Exactly. His Social Security was only, I think, $1,300 a month. That was the only income that he had. So what we did, we worked with the social worker at the hospital, and ultimately we had to deplete all of his resources in order to get him eligible for Medicaid, which does provide some long-term care coverage. But if you're married, that's a big concern.
And why is that a big concern?
Well, fortunately, there have been changes so that spouses are not, their financial wherewithal is not depleted. So the retirement savings that she had in her name was excluded from his evaluation.
Is that just in Georgia, or is that nationally?
That's national.
It's a federal
for those
change.
Kinds of things. So her retirement savings were excluded. Their house was excluded, so that she would not be left without a home if they had to deplete those resources. But it still took several months before they were able to do that, and had to spend down the money that he did have.
Before he would be eligible for Medicaid in the state of Georgia.
Correct.
All right. And I want our listeners to hear this fact. Approximately $6 billion a year is spent on health care outside of the state health benefit plan. Okay, so we call that Medicaid. About a third of it, my understanding is, goes to pay for nursing homes. It could be even higher. Could be a third to two-thirds of that $6 billion. So somewhere between $2 and $4 billion a year in the state of Georgia goes to help people such as the person Cindy's discussing now. And that, if you want to know where your healthcare dollar is, that's it. I think it's pretty well spent. And we have this in place, so that people can be taken care of. But Medicare, for the elderly stops at 60 days. Medicaid then soon takes over.
Only if you are what we might describe as medically indigent, meaning that your assets are less than what the cost of your care is going to be.
Once again, we're talking to Cindy Gatton, patient advocate. So, Cindy, what could they have done to prepare for this otherwise, and what should our listeners do to prepare for this?
What Holly ended up doing was to purchase long-term care insurance for herself.
So she learned from that to take care of herself.
Absolutely. She had children, and she wanted to make sure that there would be the financial means there, that her children wouldn't be in the position of having to financially provide for her as she ages as well. A lot of people will say that they can't afford long-term care insurance, but I think one thing we know is that we're all living longer. And we live longer with chronic kinds of conditions that may very well put us in a position of needing these kinds of care as we get older.
Do you run into many of your clients who already have long-term care?
Occasionally. I think the concern about this is something which is getting on the radar screen for a lot more folks now than it possibly did 10 or 20 years ago. The policies have been around for a long time, but not that many people bought into them when they were young.
And that's important. I'm going to tell you a personal story. I have long-term care, and I'm concerned based on what you just told me. And I thought, I've got a great policy. I have long-term care. I pay for it as a premium for 10 years. Then it's paid up. And it provides, which was supposed to be a higher premium or reimbursement or payment of $150 a day. Oh, that was supposed to be pretty good. Well, I can do the math real quickly. I was a math professor in my former life, and that's $4,500 a month. So it would not even come close to covering the $7,000 you just mentioned. So is my experience similar to any that you've heard about?
It is, and I think what we as consumers have to think about is, do we have savings that would cover, in this case, if it was $7,000 a month, can we afford $2,500 a month more? Theoretically, if we're on Social Security at that point, your Social Security income will count for some of that. So
Right.
if that might make up the gap, then maybe $150 a day is good, and that would work for you. But inflation hits everything, and
Yes.
it's going to hit the costs of this care as well. So it's important when you look at a policy to make sure that it does cover inflation, that it will grow.
Oh, good point. Mine does have inflation on it, so maybe it's higher now. So I'm going to leave the show and go back here on Saturday morning and see if my policy has that in it. But I would advise anybody to certainly seek this out. You never know when you're going to need it. And that's the point about insurance. That's the point about health insurance, right? Of course,
That's right.
You don't need it till you need it, and you have to buy it ahead of time. Now, under Obamacare, you're going to be able to now buy insurance once you need it. One of the chinks in the armor of Obamacare. It's good for the consumer, but still, if you don't have the insurance, whether it's long-term care, whether it's health care, then you're going to be on the hook for a period of time until you can get the health care, certainly through the exchanges. So they've been through this process. How's the patient doing?
This story doesn't have a happy ending. Tom had a lot of health problems, and it's not uncommon after a massive stroke like that to continue to experience some other issues, particularly as you become bedridden. I'm sorry to say that he passed away late last year.
Sorry to hear that.
And that was a real impetus for Holly to look at what this meant for her for the rest of her life. And it was the impetus for her to purchase long-term care insurance.
Right. Well, that's a lesson to be learned. So the advice for you is, how do people go about finding long-term care insurance? Who do they call?
AARP used to be one of the great resources for this, but with so many of us as baby boomers beginning to look at this, AARP stepped out of that market. To my understanding, I believe right now there are only 3 carriers that are offering long-term care insurance. I think if you've got your own insurance broker, they should be able to help you with that. And I'll make a promise to go look and see how you might source somebody for that if you don't have somebody you already work with.
Excellent. And they can go to your website by going where?
www.cindy, C-I-N-D-I, Gatton, Gatton.com, or calling me directly at 404-687-6998.
Once again, thanks for joining us, Cindy.
It's always a pleasure.